Good morning. It's Monday morning in Israel, just before Christmas and Hanukkah, and I'm delighted that Ya'akov Katz is available today to speak with us about the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu. Yaakov wrote a really superb piece in the Jewish Chronicle that was published on Friday. You'll find it in the podcast notes. And he gets into what he calls the nuance of Benjamin Netanyahu's skill as a leader. It's a fantastic piece. It really makes you think hard. And Yaakov has come today to discuss that. And of course, we're going to get into so much more. So thank you so much for being here. I'm Vivian Bercovici, former Canadian ambassador to Israel, and now looking up at the blue sky and hoping that tomorrow brings better news about the hostages and the suffering of Israelis and Palestinians and Syrians. This region has had more than enough. Stay with us. So nice to see you. 12:20 in Israel. How are you today, Yaakov?
It's actually a nice day outside, so, taking the winds where I can get them.
It's spectacular. It's just a beautiful sunny day and always lifts the spirits no matter what's going on around us. And there is plenty going on around us, correct? So let's just get right into it. You wrote a really exceptional article that was published in the Jewish Chronicle. I believe it was on Friday. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we'll include the link, of course, in the podcast notes. And your basic thesis was, love him or hate him, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is a master, more than a master. He's a genius. And he has this peerless, in my view, ability to kind of manage the brass knuckle demands of partisan politics and power and higher goals. And the higher goal in this case, of course, is securing the position of Israel in the Middle East, taking care of our outrageous security demands. And you just articulated it so powerfully and succinctly. So what was your thesis, and why did you decide to do this piece at this time?
Thank you for the compliment, first of all. Secondly, I think it really came from a point of what we've seen over the last week or 10 days of Netanyahu now on the trial going on, but now him taking the stand and giving testimony and spending 5, 6, 7 hours a day, multiple times a week in a courtroom, is like you're looking at these kind of two Netanyahus, right? There's the Netanyahu who's on trial, who's talking about, did my wife ask for a gift and did she take home a bottle of champagne, or did I get a cigar from Aaron and Milchin? And did I have a quid pro quo arrangement with Alovich, who owned at one point the Walla website, and for regulatory benefits, he gave me positive coverage. In other words, like the Bibi of the pettiness, the Bibi of the alleged corruption. And I compound that with the big expose that was on the Israeli version of 60 Minutes called Uvda just last week, with all his WhatsApp messages between his wife Sarah and somebody who used to be the director of his office in the Likud party, where basically they were all coordinating and managing what has been called the poison machine of how to just attack the attorney general and do a protest against a bereaved family or whatever it is. Oh, no holds barred. In other words, these people did everything. That's one Bibi. But there is another Bibi. And it's a Bibi who has, I don't want to say single-handedly, because it's not single-handedly, but I think he does deserve a ton of the credit, has changed the Middle East, has re-engineered the region, has decimated Hezbollah, has decimated Hamas, has exposed and weakened Iran in a way never seen before, has all of that led to the downfall of Bashar al-Assad. This is something that we can't just ignore. And even with our criticism of him, and there's plenty, this is something that has to give us pause and recognize that it's a multifaceted, nuanced individual, and our approach to him should be that way too.
No question. And you and I have gone back and forth on the enigma / miracle of Benjamin Netanyahu for a long time now. But he is also the same Benjamin Netanyahu who presided over October 7th and the years that led up to that. So I just want to, not to burst the balloon, but to just point out that there are many facets even within BB1 and BB2.
Viv, I totally agree with you. And
Right.
he owns the failures of October 7th. He is responsible. And if it was up to me, he should have gone home a long time ago. But that doesn't mean we can ignore the successes that have come since then as well. In other words, it was born out of ashes and born out of disaster, but it is a mega success.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that so many of us would like to understand more clearly is exactly what led to October 7th, what transpired in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, and what has changed, if anything, since. We're now almost a year and a quarter, 15 months away from that horrible day. And I believe it's all part of the same story. We can't isolate that Bibi from this Bibi. But yes, there has been a historical redrawing of the map, really the most dramatic since probably 1919, perhaps 1948, in the Middle East. And then what's really interesting, and I was thinking about it as I read your piece, is how much of the success is due to the strategic brilliance of Benjamin Netanyahu and his team, which has to include, of course, the heads of Mossad, Shin Bet, and the IDF, whether he wants to include them or not. How much of what we're seeing today as success is attributable to him, and how much of it is kind of opportunity, luck, and seizing those opportunities? For example, I was just watching the 60 Minutes episode with Leslie Stahl interviewing two now retired Mossad agents who were deeply involved in the Beeper episode in Lebanon in September, in which thousands of beepers, as we recall, were activated simultaneously throughout Lebanon in the hands and on the bodies of Hezbollah members and caused really ugly physical damage and permanent damage. It's fantastic. I'll put that link in too, because whoever hasn't watched it should. But that operation was in the planning for 10 years. 10 years. And then someone, and we don't know who, said, this is the moment. We have to activate Operation Beeper. Apparently, there was concern that they were about to be exposed and the whole project, all the 10 years, was going to go down the drain. And Operation Beeper has been credited really with being the kind of, if you're playing Jenga, that was the Jenga piece that made the whole tower fall. That was a critical moment, more than anything, since October 7th. What do you think of that?
Well, I think to your question, it's a combination of everything that you mentioned. It's his skill, it's his staff, it's the heads of the Mossad and the IDF and the Shabak, and the brilliant people like those two agents or former agents who were interviewed on 60 Minutes, who really did and came up with an incredible idea. And one of them tells the story even of how he came to the director of the Mossad with the bulky beeper. And the head of the Mossad said, this is not going to work. And they went ahead and because they needed a bulkier beeper version, and they created a whole story around why the bulkier version is waterproof, dirt proof, this proof, that proof. And they got Hezbollah to buy. In other words, these are amazingly brilliant people. That's not Netanyahu, right? But the combination of it all, I think to a large extent is also him. And by the way, there was also luck that it worked, that it was successful. I look at Assad, for example, and the downfall of Assad. I don't know that Israeli intelligence predicted that this would happen. All indications are that they actually were quite surprised by what happened. So I think that also there, it's easy to take credit for something that turned out well, as opposed to having to live or stand up to the failures or the stains, what would happen if everything would go sideways. But even with that, this is an Israel that is very much Benjamin Netanyahu's Israel. And he has been the leader since 2009, not including the 3 years that he was prime minister in the 1990s. There was only a year and a half that he was not prime minister.
The
We
furlough. The furlough.
He had a break to write a book
Right.
when Bennett and Lapid were prime minister. But I mean, even then, it was as if he was still prime minister, right? So you really have had now almost we're coming up on the 16th year since his return to office. That is a very long time. And it's, the mistakes are his to own, but the successes are his to get credit for. And that's all I was trying to say.
And you said it, and it was very well said. And I think that in particular, his fixation and justifiable fixation on Iran and its place in the Middle East, the way that has played out and the way in which he is just capped Iran at the knees. Iran is hobbling at best at the moment, it would seem. Their land bridge to resupply Hezbollah through Syria has been cut off. The new leader of Syria, who now goes by Ahmed al-Sha'ar, he's dropped his nom de guerre. He has made it clear that he will not allow Iran to use Syria as a land supply route for Hezbollah. So the next challenge, I suppose, for Benjamin Netanyahu, or one of the next challenges, is how to deal with Iran and its plans to basically fly over Syrian airspace, one would assume, and into Beirut in order to resupply Hezbollah. But never a shortage of challenges in this part of the world, right?
I want to add one other thing, and obviously there's going to still a lot of challenges that come ahead, but there's something to, there's the big question when it comes to Netanyahu. Is everything now angled at him staying in power? And it's all about how can he remain the prime minister, and it's all about political survival. And I think to a large extent, by the way, it is, right? I think that Syria plays into that as well, right? Syria is volatile, it's unstable. You need me to keep you safe, right? That's why he keeps going up there, goes up to the north, goes up to the Golan, goes up to the Syrian side of the Hermon, talks about what it's like to be there 50 years later, 55 years later. It's all aimed at this image of how you need me to keep you safe, right? Which has long been the Netanyahu strategy. But I think there's another layer to it. You see, I believe that he definitely thinks that he has to remain in power, and he wants to remain in power. But I think that in his mind, he's convinced that him remaining in power is what keeps you and I alive. And that if he wasn't in power, the country would have an existential problem. Now, so therefore, when he thinks about, it's not just about political survival. Yes, it is, but political survival for him is Israel's survival. Now, that's obviously extreme and wrong, and everyone's replaceable, and a country's not dependent on one single individual. But that very much is where I think his mind is and where his headspace is. And that affects a lot of the decisions that are made. For example, you spoke about Iran right now. You spoke about Syria, but take something even simpler, right? Take the ultra-Orthodox draft. He knows that this is a huge problem. He knows that we're short soldiers. He knows that the reservists have served and are overstretched and underpaid and tired. And he knows there's 50 to 70,000 Haredi men who are of draftable age who are exempt. So why doesn't he draft them? He knows we need them. Because in his mind, if he drafts them and the government falls, then Israel falls. So he needs to keep the Haredi happy. So his government stays so he can keep Israel staying. It's all convoluted in that way.
There's another important element of keeping what I would call fringe elements of society happy, in order that he can maintain his hold on power. And that would be the Ben Gvir Smotrich crowd, which really represent another very hardcore, hard-right constituency that creates a whole other set of problems, not just in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, but now increasingly within the Gaza Strip. Talk about that bit.
Within the Gaza Strip, but also when it comes to a potential hostage deal, right? Because now, as a potential hostage deal comes together, there seems to be two schools of thought, or one that's more realistic and the other one which is more hopeful. The more realistic one is this is going to be a multi-stage deal. There will be stage one, which will include the release of X number of hostages. Israel wants it to be apparently somewhere in the mid-30s, but it will include a certain number, the humanitarian cases, people who are dangerously ill, the women, the children, whoever's alive, left, whatever. But the men, and the definitely younger men, are going to be left, unfortunately, for the second stage. Now, there is a big push right now by the hostages forum and a lot of other people that Israel should not agree to that it should demand one deal. Now, why would Israel not agree to one deal? Israel might want one deal. Hamas seems to not want one deal. But the reason that Hamas doesn't want one deal or one entire package is because then it loses the leverage. Israel will get everyone in, and then it could restart the war. Now, if Israel gets only part back and then restarts the war, there's still a group that remains in Gaza. And this is exactly where the hostages, some of the families are concerned, is that Netanyahu will go for the first part, agree to a temporary ceasefire, but then under pressure from Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, as you mentioned, he's going to have to go back into Gaza, and that will not allow for the release of the second batch of hostages.
So I was going to get to the hostages, but I wanted to go back some fundamentals first. But now that you've raised the hostages, I have to throw in a few little tidbits. One is that just yesterday, we were hearing the government push back hard and saying, no, the first stage has to include some men. I think the number was 7 who did not fall within these categories, whoever determines these categories. The other thing we heard from Hamas, I believe on Friday, was that there are some individuals who one might expect would be included in the first tranche or stage of release, but they won't be released because they consider them to be soldiers. And there's only one group of people, and that is the female IDF soldiers who have been in captivity, who were taken from Nahal Oz base. So there's a lot of murkiness around this, but there's another aspect of the struggle over, or the conflict within Israel over, who should be released. Should it be one stage or two stages? And then there's the Smotrich Ben-Gvir approach, which is no stages, actually. We think that we should remain in Gaza forever.
Yes.
We think that it is a priority that we resettle they're still so smarting over having been forcibly removed from what we call the Gush Katif settlements that were in the Gaza Strip, and there were several thousand Israelis who were, some physically, forcefully removed from their homes. The graves of dead Jews were, the bodies were exhumed and reburied in Israel. It was a very, very dramatic and difficult period in this country from 2004 to 2005, preceding the unilateral withdrawal of Israel from Gaza that was decided upon by the government of then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. But today, and we know that the extreme right in this country, part of why they hate the judiciary and are so motivated to push judicial reform is because they feel that the Israeli Supreme Court was their enemy in that time in ordering that the settlements be dismantled and removed. And they want to take back the night. And they've said publicly and repeatedly that the hostages are not a priority. Resettling the Gaza Strip is. That's what Benjamin Netanyahu is really grappling with, not the one tranche, two tranche thing.
No. You are right on the layers of it. Yes, the top layer is the bigger master vision of what's going to happen. In practice, it's impacting the hostage deal. So I maybe jumped too quickly to the end. But there is a clash of what is going to happen in Gaza, right? Now, I bet you if we were to get Bibi on this podcast and we were to say to him, no one's listening, just tell us, what do you want to resettle Gaza? He would probably say no. I'm pretty damn sure he would, right? Yeah, he don't want to go back into the Gaza Strip, but he is dealing with a government where two of his strategic partners in that government, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, are bent on returning to the Gaza Strip. They want the war to continue. They want, for a number of reasons. They want to prevent Hamas from rebuilding. They want to continue to eliminate its capabilities and degrade it, but they also want to deny ever the possibility of a Palestinian state. And there's no better way to do that than to continue war, to continue a conflict, even if you don't need to have that conflict continue. Now, it's impacting Israeli strategic policy because we still don't know. Do you know, like, what's happening? How does this war ever end? Or does it not ever end? Does it continue in the forever war? Wasn't that what Biden called the war in Afghanistan, the forever war? Right? Which took America a long time to finally end. And when it finally did end, it ended in a massive, colossal disaster, which, by the way, could be where we're headed as well if we don't figure out a way to fill that void and vacuum in Gaza. But it's also impacting, and this is just more urgently and existentially right now, it's impacting the hostages and whatever type of deal is made possible. So again, Netanyahu is playing the politics of it, and he's trying to get the best deal that's possible or the best option that's possible within those limitations, right? Now, you or I, if we were asked, I think I could speak for you, if we had the opportunity.
I would never be so presumptuous, but carry on.
I'm going to try. I'll go out on a limb. If we had the option to make a deal to end the war, whatever number of Palestinian prisoners that's, make logical, make sense, get back all the hostages, and it means the end of the war, you and I would take that deal at this point, right? Bibi can't because of the politics of it. But he won't say that I can't because of the politics of it. So it'll be massaged. He'll do deal stage 1. And then stage 2, when it collapses, we have to go back in. Well, it's because Hamas is rebuilding itself. We have to go back and act, and then it'll fall apart on its own.
You see, and this is where I have a really big problem personally with the disjunctiveness between this man, this Bibi Netanyahu, whose being is so deeply entwined, intermeshed with the state of Israel's security. And if that's true, then you have to understand the mentality and the concerns of the nation, but who is prepared to trade off the lives of these hostages who have become icons, in my view, for the national resilience, will, unity, mamlachtit, right? It's a word in Hebrew that it's like this glue that holds us together. They've become so important.
There's no good translation. It means basically putting the state first.
The state, in this state, is the people. And that's a very important disconnect as I see it. Now, I just have to go back to a couple of things. You set out 4 reasons that we might assume that Benjamin Netanyahu would be kind of grappling with what to do in Gaza in dealing with his right-wing coalition partners. But I believe that there's a 4th reason, and I do believe that that is this. They are, and I said this earlier, determined to bring what they call the elitist, leftist sort of, mafia of old Ashkenaz interests that control this country. They are determined to bring them to heel. And that is what that wing of this government prizes. That's what lies behind the judicial reform. So you're just going to have to give me that one. You got 3, I get that one. But here's something.
I agree with you to some extent. I mean,
to some extent, it's always a qualifier.
No, because you put in a lot there. Yes, they want to change the balance of power. They want to do that to solidify their power base. They want to be able to do what they want to do without having checks and balances, right? I don't know that it's necessarily, Mizrahi, Ashkenazi. I don't know if it's necessarily right, left. It's more we want full control. We want full authority. And like there was a couple of years ago, Miri Regev, who's the transportation minister, had this comment, which blew my mind at the time, but it's so telling. It was when they changed the public broadcaster. Like we used to have like the BBC, and then they made the new BBC, and now called Khan. And when they did this, and they were passing the law for Khan, which now they want to shut it down now. Miri Regev purportedly said in the cabinet meeting, where does it make sense that we fund and establish a broadcaster, but we don't control it? In other words, in their minds, it's all about control. It's all about, so if I have a court that I don't control, what does that mean? I have an attorney general who has independence. Why? I have a state's attorney who can do what they want, and why? I'm in control. And that's what it's really about here. And that's what's also scary, because we know what happens when these governments get too much control.
We have become a true Levantine country, sort of starting to lean towards a different form of government, one that might not resemble the liberal democracies that we come from. But I have to sort of throw this in because there are a number of ways in which Bibi and my favorite Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau of Canada, are similar. I think that their intellects, there's a huge delta between their intellectual capability, or separating it, but they both understand power and holding on to power. And apropos your comment about controlling the public broadcaster, that's exactly what the government of Canada has been doing, and man, oh man, is it blowing back on them. But I agree with your comment that you made initially that this isn't about right-left, and I think we've established that over many months. I don't say it's a right-left, but that is the divisive and really intentionally inflammatory language used by this government to stoke, this idea that, these elites, these leftist anarchists in Tel Aviv. In the meantime, it's like everybody, including, as we've said many times, the former heads of Shabak and the Mossad and the governors of the Bank of Israel. And I mean, these aren't a bunch of, flakes. There's really not just the establishment, but I think that there's been poll after poll demonstrating that the people in this country who work and serve are not pleased with the fact that the hostages remain in captivity and the reasons for that. And I want to go back as well now because it's just too delicious not to. You sort of, were musing, well, what if we had Benjamin Netanyahu on this show? And we asked him, do you think that we should be occupying Gaza, that we should remain there permanently? And you stated with confidence that he would likely say absolutely not. There would be a long but after that. But I want our listeners to understand how completely impossible that little sort of whimsical thought is, because Benjamin Netanyahu does not meet with domestic media. He does not submit to those kinds of questions. So I'm going to just bear with me and lay out a bit of a tableau, and then you can take it away. The night before Benjamin Netanyahu was to appear for the first day of his trial testimony, and these are onerous days. These are, I think, 6 hours. I know from my experience as a litigation lawyer that, they used to say for every hour in court, you've got 10 hours of prep. That might be a little exaggerated, but it's tough going, and it takes a lot of time for him too. And he was slated, and the judges said, no, we're not. They refused his request to not testify 3 days a week and to make that a little less onerous. The judges said, sorry, dude, we're going ahead. Okay, so the prime minister of Israel, in a country that is engaged in these insane multi-front conflicts and then diplomatic conflicts and everything else, he's going to be on the stand. The night before he's going on the stand, he holds a press conference. It's the first press conference in about 100 days that he has held with the domestic Israeli media. And it turned into what I think was a bit of a gong show, because the reporters, and in particular one from Channel 12, were asking questions about the appropriateness of a sitting prime minister, particularly at a time like this, taking all this time and spending it in a courtroom, to which Bibi replied, I don't sleep. I don't do anything. I don't have a life. This is all I do. And he might as well have added, and I'm probably the most brilliant person in this room and anywhere by far. But he engaged in about 10 or 15 minutes of very combative behavior with the press. Told them, all you guys do is lie, fake news, you've been out to get me, you support, this kind of elitist judicial putsch to retain control of the country. He went on a tear. And you and I both know that in the ensuing days, he threw so much red meat at the hungry lions in the Israeli media, and they dined out on that. Park that. Just in the last week, we see, who does Benjamin Netanyahu go to share his thoughts about what's going on in Israel, how brilliant he has been, and look at what he's accomplished? Well, in the Wall Street Journal, I believe it was on Friday or on Saturday, they called it an interview. I read it. I'm sure you did as well. Struck me as being anything but an interview, and read more like a communications document issued by the Prime Minister's office. It was quite clear from the way in which this, quote, interview was written up by the Wall Street journalist writer that there were no questions asked of Benjamin Netanyahu, no challenges made to Benjamin Netanyahu. Right from the beginning, the reporter says, Benjamin Netanyahu says hello, and then he kind of went off in what I assume was a 10-minute speech, and that was published, skillfully written up to provide context, to make it seem as if maybe it really was an interview. But this is how the Prime Minister of Israel communicates. He communicates with America. He communicates externally, not domestically. So assuming you agree with absolutely everything I just laid out, talk to us about how he deals with the press and doesn't, and why.
First of all, I'll just say that I think you could get him on the podcast, but you'd have to praise and extol and give admiration and adulation all the time, very similar to what was done in the Wall Street Journal by Elliot Kaufman, the writer of that piece, right? I mean, what Elliot did was basically give Netanyahu the ability to just say whatever he wanted. There was no challenge. There was no question. There was no word of criticism. That's not how an interview is ever done. It was basically a Netanyahu op-ed explaining how he didn't know, he had been woken up. He was informed by the IDF. It's part of that whole version that he has long been trying to tell. He was a victim to, maybe you can hint it was a conspiracy by people in the army and elsewhere who wanted to bring him down. But anyhow, no one told him that this was what Hamas was planning. And maybe had they woken him up and told him, he would have done something and he could have saved the day. Totally ignoring the fact that for 15 years he had been the prime minister, and that everything that happened was a result of policies that he was the one who had implemented, enacted, and strategized. But Netanyahu's whole media strategy is all about how to avoid anything that is difficult and anything that requires a challenge by a journalist. And for that reason, he doesn't give interviews, definitely not to local Israeli journalists. He rarely gives press conferences. Mm-hmm. When he does speak, it's usually only to Channel 14 or to journalists like Elliot Kaufman from the Wall Street Journal, right? That would be the proper and appropriate venue, because it's, someone who he knows can and will write basically what he wants them to. I mean, that's just not how things should be done, right? Not to mention the fact that I think the Israeli people suffer as a result because we don't get answers to questions. We don't know what the strategy is. There's no one who's actually challenging the thinking that's going on within the government. But I will also just say that when there was a press conference the night before he took the stand in his trial, and all the questions were, classic Israeli media questions about the politics and about the trial and about this. And no one's, Israeli journalists are also not that high quality. I have to say. Some are great, but for the most part, it always falls back to the same stupid questions of, who's going to sit with who in a government and who's going to be, will you sit with Bibi? Will you not sit with Bibi? What will you do? Did you know about your wife getting a champagne bottle? Did you not know about your wife getting a champagne bottle? There are serious questions out there that have to be answered, and nobody's challenging that. So even when he does do a press conference, the media, for the most part, is asking really stupid things.
So let's ask some serious questions today in the few minutes that we have left with respect to one of, if not the most pressing issues in Israel now, the hostages. They're dying. I believe it's 96, the number I read this morning, that remains. And they're not going to be able to survive this continued captivity. There is serious concern as to whether or not Hamas even knows who is held, where, by whom,
Who's
what they're
alive? Who's dead?
exactly what they're, as Hamas reportedly said on Friday, we need a week. We need a pause of a week in order to locate all of the hostages and assess their condition, which sounds to me like a euphemism to sort of do the dead and alive tally. It's extraordinary that we are in this place. I know we all agree on that. It's extraordinary that after all this time, we have not been able to negotiate their release. We don't even have their names. And then there again is that thing that happens every time Israel negotiates with terrorist entities. We might get back 30 people, 40 people who are alive, 50, God willing. And for every one of our hostages, dead and alive, they get multiples. Close out on why this insanity continues.
It continues because we are facing a vicious enemy. I mean, that's the truth, right? It continues because we're facing an enemy that doesn't care about people's lives, that doesn't care about their fate and their future, and in the worst way possible, abuses these people, abuses an entire nation with them. That's the basic level. Now, throw into the mix a war started with a colossal disaster that was hard to walk away from. And the politics that come into how do I, still survive this? And you have a recipe for not a potentially good outcome. There's so many other interests that are at play here. There's Hamas's long-term interests. There's Netanyahu's interests. There's Ben-Gvir Smotrich's interests, as you mentioned before. There are the other regional players who are involved, whether it's the Qataris or the Egyptians or the Turks. There's a lot of cooks in this kitchen that need to be all brought on board. And sometimes this can be advantages and sometimes it can be in disadvantage. We're in the twilight of one administration, another one taking office in America. That can be good because the whip of Trump could resonate right now, but it could also be bad because Biden is weak and is perceived as weak, so doesn't really have leverage over Hamas or its patrons. This is why this continues. And I hope that this is something that really can lead to a deal of some sort. But here it's going to come down to, again, the tough decision that will have to be made. If it can't be done in one group, one batch, Do we take the 2 batch or do we not? And I could hear arguments in both ways, but one second, you want to tell me you can save this number of people and you're going to say no because you want to get them all? I think we know what the answer will be.
I get all of the realpolitik concerns and the hard-edged, strategic trade-offs. But I'm going to close out just sharing a very brief vignette. I went for the first time on Saturday night to the hostage support rally in Kiryat Gat, which is about a half hour from where I now live in Sha'ar Negev. Kiryat Gat is where the survivors of Kibbutz Be'eri and Kibbutz Nir Oz have been living since October 7th. And it had a very, very different atmosphere from any of the others I've been to, and I've been to them all over Israel. You felt like you were in a kibbutz. You could feel that everyone knew one another. You could feel their agony. My heart literally, physically hurt. And among the speakers that night was Avital Dekelchen, beautiful young mother in her early 30s, who 1 month after her husband Sagi was taken hostage, gave birth to their 3rd daughter. It is believed that Sagi Dekelchen, who is an American citizen, is alive. And there have been murmurings from Hamas that, we have 7 Americans, 3 are alive, 4 obviously are not. And there's speculation that Eden Alexander, the soldier, is, because we had recent proof of life in a video, that he's alive. There is hope that the other 2 are Keith Siegel and Sagi Dekelchen. And I would say to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, come with me to Kiryat Gat on Saturday night, and you tell them why they should be released in 2 stages. Because those people are sitting and waiting, and you have to account to them before Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. So on that note, I'm going to refer our listeners to the stateoftelaviv.com website, where I did post a brief article about Saturday night in Kiryat Gat with some photographs. It was really beyond moving. And I'm also going to post soon the remarks that Avital Dekelchen made in Hebrew with subtitles. The plea of a mother with 3 young daughters who ask every day why their father isn't coming home. And he could be home.
And let's hope he does so.
Amen to that. We always end on the hostages, which I love that commitment. And thank you so much for joining me today, Ya'akov. Always insightful. We didn't even get to Syria and Al-Jilani and, whatever. It's too much.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ya'akov. Have a great day. It was wonderful speaking with Ya'akov Katz after I think it's been 2 weeks. I always wonder in between our discussions what's going on, what he's saying. Unfortunately, I get glimpses into his thought process when he writes these fantastic pieces in various publications. Thank you so much for being here. Please like us, love us, ring the bell on the YouTube site, and subscribe. We're working hard to broaden our base and get what I think is really responsible and important commentary and discussion about Israel to a broader audience. This discussion will also be released on the State of Tel Aviv site as a podcast. And you know what to do. Subscribe, the works. And for those of you who are not yet committed as financial supporters, as paying subscribers of State of Tel Aviv, I implore you in this holiday season to please consider doing that. We are independent, and that revenue is what allows us to bring you what I think is really strong content. So, have a wonderful holiday. Happy Hanukkah if you celebrate. Merry Christmas if you celebrate. Just if you don't, then go crazy and relax. I really miss this time of year in North America, I have to say, because it's that Christmas, New Year's week where everything just stops, right? Nothing goes on. And it's so nice. We used to just sit at home, me and my daughters, light fires, eat delicious food, watch the snow, not do a whole lot more. Thanks for being here. See you soon.